On our earth, before writing was invented, before the printing press was invented, poetry flourished. That's why we know that poetry is like bread. It should be shared by all, by scholars and by peasants, by all our vast, incredible, extraordinary family of humanity. That was Pablo Neruda. I'm Bob Holman, and this is the Poetry is Bread podcast, where poetry challenges us, makes us think, and with imagination and courage, changes the world. Today we meet two poets who take great pleasure pushing poetry to the extremes of language, Andrei Codrescu and Edwin Torres. Andrei Codrescu's Romanian growl will be familiar to anyone who's ever listened to NPR, as Dada in life as he is in his art. He's got the greatest glasses in Park Slope. His work sprawls across continents and countercultures, an abstract archaeologist of the lost souls of history. Andrei's longer bio is on the podcast page, along with links to where you can learn more about him. Andrei, really good to have you here, brother.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that introduction, which now commits me to a number of thoughts.
Well, you're going for it,
All
which
right.
is the place. Why don't we begin at the beginning? We want to go back to the to you in Romania, or I would assume there, where you had something that made you want to get into poetry, to write a poem. Was there a specific poem or poet? How did that happen?
Well, I was born in a small town in Sibiu, Transylvania, in Romania, which at the time was empty because most of the men had been killed in the war. And so there were mostly women there and children and this really mean teachers we had in high school. And I started writing poetry as a way to piss off my stepfather. And I thought that this would, be some kind of, I would get out of his clutches, because he was a mean guy. But,
Poetry does that, it doesn't go, it's a rebellion in itself. It refuses to go to the end of the page. I don't know why it's so exciting that way, right? It has such political overtones, but this is the way to get back at your stepdad.
yeah,
Write a poem.
angry, yeah. And but then I read it at a workshop in my hometown, and I started.
You had workshops in
yeah,
Wow.
it was a Wednesday night meeting where local writers, there were quite a few of them actually, got together and
intellectuals at a bar. Are we talking about?
Well, no, it was in the headquarters of the Communist Party. Was a room underneath. So everybody wrote poems that were harmless, and my friends and I were trying not to be harmless. And the Communist Party demanded certain things. You had to write about tractors. They were the heroes of the 5-year plan who worked themselves to death, and other sort of metaphors for those things. And so we didn't write that at all. And we were reading the pre-war poets like Lucian Blaga and Tudor Arghezi. These are modernists from before the war. I read Tristan Tzara in an edition that was forbidden, and
Tristan Tzara, the grandpapa of Dada. As I recall, he was born Sammy Rosenstock. Is that right?
Right. Well, I was born Andrei Perlmutter.
Well, you opened a paint store in New York, your family.
Yeah, and the cancer center too.
So it sounds like the Soviet, you were born under the Soviet regime. You saw a lot of history going on while you were in Romania. Did any of it get into your poems?
Well, it did, but I thought it did because I spoke metaphorically about what was then the sort of general boredom and despair of everybody around me, but probably only other poets got it. So, because most people didn't read that poetry, so the newspapers published only, praises to the party in the front pages. what we wrote mainly we read to ourselves, and we thought we were making a revolution when we read these poems, and they were
They were.
revolutionary
Well,
for the time. Yeah,
Dada is anti-art, you know. You started writing in Romanian, I guess?
yeah.
And, what was it like? How did you switch to English? Did you, move to is that when you moved to the US you learned English?
Oh, well, my first languages are German and Hungarian. Actually, I spoke German with my nanny, who and my mother, before I went to school, and I spoke Hungarian with my grandmother. And when I went to school, they told me we learned in Romanian, but then they told me it was a different language, which I didn't know before that. I just thought that Hungarian is how you talk to Peter, and German is how you talk to your nanny, and they said, well, they're different languages.
Kids, the best language learners there are. If we could they don't even learn, they, um, access it, you know?
Right. I mean, my brain sort of froze when they said, well, these are different languages. But then
Wow.
they're not, actually, because basically you can speak any language. There's a tunnel under the languages, and you just go in there. I once had a perfect conversation with young women in Japanese. And of course, I was an acid, but that didn't make
It's
any difference.
repetition and communication and a lot of those beautiful eyes you've got.
Music.
Indeed. Yeah. So it was when did English come in?
Well, when I was 19 years old, we applied for a visa to leave Romania. And at the time, the dictator had this dirty deal going with Israel and West Germany. And Jewish ethnics could leave for $10,000, which I owe the state of Israel, and I probably paid it by now in taxes. But uh, we're lucky to go that way.
Right.
So really was a real thing that opened for us to leave the socialist camp, which was really a barbed wire compound.
Wow.
And we got out. And I we could have gone anywhere. We had a period of 6 months where we waited to see where we're going to go, New Zealand or Australia or wherever.
Mm.
But my mother knew someone in Detroit, and he was a relative. So we came to America, and this is where I wanted to come in the first place, because this is where all the music was coming from.
Great. And so it was in Detroit where you first came into contact with English.
Yeah, I went to the Writers and Artists Workshop that John Sinclair ran on the John Lodge Expressway, and it was a dark beat sort of place. And within a year of being there, it suddenly burst into colors because all the suburban kids who took acid came into town, and then it was a different place. The 60s had really started.
Wow. John Sinclair, who started the White Panthers and who was busted for pot, and John Lennon had the benefit for him. Great DJ, great musical sensibility.
Right. He also produced the MC5, which was the beginning of the old punk noise thing.
All the rock and roll. So were you bringing the Dada of Romania into that world?
Well, pretty much, except I told him I was French because I didn't think anybody knew what Romanian was. So the first poster that has my name on it is from 1966, and it says it was one of those psychedelic posters done by Gerard Grimshaw that you couldn't really read. And at the bottom it said, with French poet Andrei Codrescu.
Hey, do you happen to have a poem that uses that kind of Dada energy?
Well, this is not so much Dada energy, but it's a poem about having gone back to Romania to cover the revolution in 1989. They took me back and they gave me medals, and including a sort of a knighthood that comes with a grave in the Heroes Cemetery,
Wow.
where a lot of national poets and people are buried. So this is not so much Dada as a poem about that. It says, "You there," said the hermit crab. "I have a grave in the country where I was born, the country that didn't want me when I was alive. When I was alive, I was told that I was from nowhere and that I must go elsewhere. where my people were really from. The people I never knew from the elsewhere I never saw. I did go elsewhere and found you. I'm from nowhere, I said. You said you have a home in me. I found a home in you. You are from nowhere too. We lived in each other's nowheres and made a somewhere. Then you remembered you were from elsewhere, so I no more had a home in you or you in me. I then had homes in other yous, and other yous had homes in me, until they too remembered they were from elsewhere and went there. I was again from nowhere. When someone else moved in me, I moved in them. I knew that they had a there in an elsewhere that wasn't my somewhere. Are you from somewhere now? And is someone from your somewhere home in you now? Will your there take you back, prodigal? Forgive your elsewhere? If it does, I'm glad for us. Until then, all nowhere is you. I have a grave in the somewhere of those who said I was from nowhere, a grave elsewhere in September air.
Wow. Wow. From nowhere.
Yes, so it's always people say, well, "Where are you from?" I always try to think of a variation on that idea because
Mhm.
it's very, I mean, I could say I'm from Transylvania, then that worked for a while.
That's
So,
it still works.
because I mean, I never rejected Dracula as a
No, as a matter
myth
of fact, you
figure.
wrote a novel about him, didn't you?
Well, no, I wrote a novel about Elizabeth Bathory, who was a Hungarian countess who used to bathe in the blood of virgins so she could keep her youth. And
Mhm.
she was the Hungarian Dracula, but Hungarians didn't like that. So,
Okay.
but the
Okay.
book is good.
All right. Yeah, it is. Now let's talk about Exquisite Corpse, a magazine that you started that was a national treasure during the years that it was published. You even named that after a Dada game.
Yeah,
You write one line, fold it over, pass it on, and you see how the poet emerges, the one voice emerges from whatever crew you're hanging out with.
yeah. The first one was André Breton and I think Philip Suppot, and André Breton wrote Cadaver, and then Suppot wrote Exquis. And when they unfolded it said Cadaver Exquis, which means exquisite corpse. So yeah, we definitely took it from there. And the surrealists loved playing this game because any number could play, and when you unfolded the paper, you had an X-ray of the collective mind. So,
There it is.
uh, yeah. So the magazine started in Baltimore, and then it was a very ambitious enterprise. I wanted to publish it once a month, and it looked like a newspaper.
It looked like a half a newspaper. It
Ro-
was a very thin, two columns
Well,
folded over.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
folded that way because it was exactly the size of a letter, so you could send it to the post office
It was a
for
beautiful thing to receive, this fat
yeah.
packet of everything in it. And part of why it was like an exquisite corpse was because you never knew what was going to follow what. It was not just poetry, essays, histories, gossip,
Reviews.
lies.
Not so many lies, but we did give out the recipe or the composition of sperm on the front page. So that was really, and then we got into various scrapes with the administration of the school of LSU where I was working. And so we had to get a mailbox because the vice chancellor objected to one of the drawings. And I thought, well, she should read the stuff. It's a lot worse.
Well, then you moved to, I mean, you've been everywhere, but you moved into Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Um, what was It's your home, the city of mystery, as Ram Devanini says, mystery, history, and dysentery. Now, we want to ask you to give us a better description of why you fell in love with New Orleans. Did
Well,
you meet any ghosts there?
well, the ghosts are everywhere. I mean, it's the oldest city in America, and it was not, it was Spanish and it was French at certain times. And so all of that is still there. It was the end of the terrible route of slaves, sugar, and rum that came through the Caribbean. It was the northernmost point of that trade. and it has all those influences there. So ghosts are people take them for granted. I mean, there are ghosts, and I love old towns because every restaurant you go in, you sit in a chair or somebody sat before you, and then they died, and then you just keep on eating. So and history has a way in New Orleans of becoming a restaurant. So this
Yes.
house, they built for Napoleon that they're going to spring from his Isle of Exile, which where he never got to, became a restaurant. It's called the Napoleon House, and it's a place for conspiring. It open all night. You can go to a cafe or a bar, and quite a number of conspiracies are hatched there. Actually, um, one guy who took a boat to Nicaragua and declared himself emperor, and until a navy ship took him out. And there's all sorts of stories that about New Orleans that are kind of mind blowing, and the culture of it is amazing. The jazz, you know,
Oh yeah.
New Orleans jazz and blues and rhythm and blues, and
Jazz
uh,
was born there. Yeah.
yeah, and that's around. I mean, that's just part of you can hear it coming out of places open.
Have you got a poem for us that has got New Orleans roots?
Well, I wrote a whole book called New Orleans Monarch, which is all about New Orleans, and a lot of those pieces were made there. But about this book was written in New York, so I don't think I mentioned New Orleans in here. But
Oh, perfect.
well, here's a problem that's actually about poetry, but probably would work everywhere. It's called Return of the Repressed in the Age of the Avant-Garde Robots. Creating and smashing ideas of high and low was a good business, but it cost followers much unneeded pain. They did get tenure, but at what cost? To take up gymnastics at their age was therapeutic, but not glorious. Still, that is the law of succession. First, the French have a good party, then the Germans clean up, then the weather messes up the plumbing, and the proletariat rises again with tools. They were waiting patiently in the unconscious for transfer.
Well, that's the history of the world in
Yeah,
a
well,
poem, and
yeah.
you bring up every place. And I think, like I mentioned before, you've lived every place in this country. You came to New York, where you lived in a garbage can, and then there was Baltimore and Northern California, the sticks of Arkansas, all this besides New Orleans. Now you're back in Brooklyn. You made a great documentary called Road Scholar in the 90s, which won a Peabody. What have you learned about this country back then, and how has it changed now? Good question.
It is. It is a good question because back then there were two things that made me do this. One was that communism had collapsed in Eastern Europe in the Soviet Union, and I was curious to see how little communities, small scale communism, still worked. So I visited a number of communities, religious based or some other ideology in upstate New York. We went to see the Oneida place where the Oneida was, the Bruderhof, which is a prosperous community up there that lives according to principles of sharing everything, and a number of places like that. I mean, I went to New Mexico for the same reason, to see how people who didn't live the mainstream American way were doing. And so that turned out to be a very good trip as to the diversity and the strength of these communities that could survive here. Now, in Europe, they couldn't have made it because Europe, liberal as it is, it still demands a kind of conformity that you wouldn't. This wouldn't work. I
Mhm.
visited the Sikhs in New Mexico, who are very warlike, and um, as they said, they learn sword fighting when they're children because they need to defend what they've got, and
Mm.
you don't. Those are ideas that survived here, but probably wouldn't elsewhere. So it was a different America, and that not just the people I visited, but anybody I would talk to was fairly friendly and not very interested in politics. And they kept their prejudices to themselves, if they had any, because they know I was from New York. So, but things have gotten worse since. And I think that if I took a similar trip now, I would encounter a lot of hostility. I don't know if those communes or communities are still there. Some of them probably are, like the Bruderhof. But I think that people are angrier and they're much quicker on the trigger, as it were, to because they're angry, and they're angry because they've been locked up by the pandemic, and they're angry because there's too much news. It's angry because they can't keep up with things, and it makes them miserable. It doesn't matter that they have some money or whatever.
Well, on that positive note, wow.
But poetry is bread. You're
Okay,
right.
here we are.
Take
What poem do you have to take us out, Andrei? I mean,
I will take you out. No need no poem for that, but I have an AR. This is a poem called Enchanted Mountain. This is one of the first poets I really loved. He was a Romanian poet who wrote in the beginning of the century, 1916. His name is Lucian Blaga, and I translated his poems from Romanian. And this is one of them. I mean, he had a wonderful fairy tale magical air. And this is Enchanted Mountain. I enter the mountain. A stone gate quietly shuts. Dream and bridge fly me up. What violet lake, what vital time. The gold fox barks from the ferns. Holy beasts lick my hands. Strange, under a spell, they stalk with eyes turned within. Buzzing through the sleep of crystals, the bees of death fly, and the years.
Blaga, Romanian poet, turn of the century.
His book I translated is called In Praise of Sleep.
In Praise of Sleep. Well, let's go do it. Let's enter the mountain here. Thank you, Andrei Codrescu, for visiting us here at Poetry is Bread.
My pleasure, Bob Holman. You're bread yourself.
See you later. Well, this is Bob Holman back. This is Poetry is Bread, the podcast where poetry is as familiar as your favorite sandwich. What kind of bread do you like? And here's our next guest, Edwin Torres, Nuyo-futurist. Nuyo being the city he calls home, New York. Nuyorican being his Puerto Rican lineage, and of course, the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, founded by Miguel Algarin and others. And then there's the future part. Well, to Edwin, the future can be found in the body. Costumed, performative, spanning octaves, all in service of the liberation of language, las palabras, set free to play, ready or not. That's K-N-O-T. Edwin Torres is in the house. How are you?
Hi, Bob. I am the knot in both K and N.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's been so long. Where did we get started? That must have been at Club 52. 54.
57.
57. It wasn't 1957.
No. But the club was, in St. Mark's. Yeah. Open mic times there, right before the Nuyo.
Right before the Nuyo, which came reopened with this surge of energy in 1989.
Well, I was doing all these performances in Dixon Place, and somebody said, Edwin, you're getting very popular. You got to, speak out for your kind. And I was like, oh, what the hell? Like they wanted to attach lineage to what I was doing, and I was just exploring. Of course, my lineage was there without me knowing about it because it's pure that way, And then somebody was saying, no, your last name, and people are following you, you're Spanish. So after getting over my anger, I realized, well, let me check out this place called the Nuyorican Cafe. And at the time, I lived like 4 blocks away from it. So there was a reading, amazingly, that same week at Poets House. And at the time, Poets House was in the school on the west side.
Oh, my goodness. You were at that reading. That's a very famous reading. That's where
Bimbo, Miguel, and Jorge Brandon.
Jorge Brandon was there.
Yep,
The El Coco que Habla, the
And-
talking coconut.
And I'm sitting there, and I didn't call myself a poet at all. I was just like this performer guy from the East Village. So I'm sitting in the back of the audience, and Bimbo goes on, and Miguel goes on. They're great. But then suddenly, and now Jorge Brandon, and from the back of the room, this small figure waddles up, covered in Dayglow construction tape that he had found on the way there, that he wrapped himself up, and he kind of waddles up, and he gets on the microphone, he goes, oh, blah, 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 like his voice was way bigger than his being, so that was like, okay, this is poetry.
That is poetry, and that was a phenomenal night. That's when, like you say, Poets House was in an old high school on the west side.
Yeah.
Lee Brissetti had just become the director. I didn't know. I think I still have the program.
Wow,
yeah. And of course, Jorge only spoke in Spanish.
Right.
And the poems were not written down. Finding is, when Miguel and I had to get a poem for him for Aloud, we had to sit him down and do what they must have done with Homer when they were trying to get the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Talk about orality.
Speak. Can you slow down a little, Mr. Homer? Writing has just been invented.
Yeah.
So, but I've forgotten about Jorge in the tape. I mean, there is a model for you.
Yeah. Well, I saw what was happening in something that I didn't go to school for. I was a graphic designer. And my entry into poetry was like seeing what all these Bauhaus and Dadaist artists were doing with letters. It's like, oh, wow, there's a connection there. And there's words there beyond the design. So my entry to language was visual in that way. So I was doing that kind of thing. And then hearing Jorge.
This was when you were in college? This was happening?
Right after college. My first few years.
So you had no poetry?
Although I'm finding.
Up in the Bronx? Did you grow up in the Bronx?
In the Bronx / East Village.
Oh, okay.
I lived in East Village when I was 20. I was like this brave, whatever. I left, and my mother cried. I said, no, I've got to, stake out my claim in the East Village. And I was doing type, design back then. And I was I found this little bit of writing. I didn't call them poems, but just I was capturing the world around me as a 20-year-old. Years later, that got transcribed into different parts of my poems. I realized that I was sort of absorbing. We all are. That's what I found out years later. How can you not absorb life? It's in you, and it's up to you to make of it, whatever emerges from the skin pores. So I had all this writing, but moving forward, and then so I'm hearing. So I had this bit of writing, and I see Jorge, and he's just, and I heard Bimbo the reading, and he was like performing in meter and everything. Miguel performing as he does, but it was like, oh, there's a poem there. Jorge goes on. It's like, whoa, okay, is this a poem? And I said, yeah, I like it. I feel it. So I realized feeling and sense were important to me. And then going to the cafe and going to the open mics, and then you and Lois encouraging me to like go further and further and further. It's like, okay, the connection to the audience, the body to the audience, the sound to the audience, and that's where language lives for me.
So let's hear one of those poems. How about it?
Well, when I was performing and somebody said, hey, Edwin, have you heard of Gerard Manley Hopkins?
What? That must have been Steve Cannon.
No, it wasn't. No, it was before Neo days. I did these performances that were like these one-man shows before the Neo, before Poets House and everything. And somebody said, Edwin, you should check out this guy. So I want to read the poem that I heard of his that said, there's something here. This is Gerard Manley Hopkins called The Windover. Okay. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dolphin, dappled dawn drawn falcon in his riding, of the rolling level underneath him steady air and striding. High there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing, in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend. The hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind, my heart in hiding, stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. Brute beauty and valor in act, oh, air, pride, plume, here, buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, oh, my chevalier. No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plow down, Cillian shine and blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves in gash, gold, vermilion.
and Gash Gold Vermilion. Gerard, Manley, Hopkins. You're going to not believe this, but Ed Hirsch was recorded for this series.
Mm.
He also quoted a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem. What is this with Hopkins all of a sudden popping out of the English oeuvre and becoming a mainstay?
Well, the sound in the mouth and the lingual and the beautiful, the flowing out and this,
he called it sprung rhythm.
Sprung rhythm,
and you did it beautifully in that rendition, I got to say.
So that inspired this poem, which was one of my first poems in the cafe. And this poem also came, in DC, there was 4 artists that were, there was a protest, and we got on the bus with Dixon Place down to DC to protest against the 4 artists.
Oh, that was Karen
Yes.
Finley and Tim
Holly
and Holly Hughes.
and there was 2 more.
And well,
So
Tim's going to kill me. I'll tell you that.
But it was about freedom of expression. So
exactly.
So I wrote
they took away their grants.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
That's what it was. Yeah. So this is about 2 years before I went to the cafe. I wrote all these notes, and the notes were written on the bus because I didn't quite know what my place was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing this political thing. I don't write political stuff. I'm just here because I these people need to speak their minds. So I was writing this kind of stuff. Years later, it became this. This is called Liberal, and this is one of the first poems that I did at the cafe, actually. Liberal Best Day. And I think that there's parts of Hopkins in here. Once upon a time, there was a moment, lovely and anxious and forever, a moment said. I try to do my liberal best day, but sometimes something comes out in jest. I realize the only person I should have this running commentary with is me. If I am the truly open mind I claim, why do I feel today the same? Is a moment of of a sound, of a ever, forever? Please close your mouth, close, too open, too far, open ears, close, 1/2, only 2/4 pieces of blue. Why did I ever trust you, fly, shoe? A single eighth analogies, a Rubik spiral subtlety, ring a void, a vapid null, a nihilistic solo, please. Suck off this electric blue gilt, tie this protection by a peer-sifting stilt, where the pool is a soul breeze-ism of a gold-gilt pheasant, a delicate prick, and nothing's left but a dream. Tie this kaleidoscope heart by amour, and then a wall of love. Amor, and then some muir of singe, of electric tinged, of blistered twinge, of moments of brutes, maintained and maimed and claimed and blamed for all collapse and all defaults and all of all in all. Why all did you flip me just like that? Have you seen my 4 sides? Can you choose your own thrill? If I chicka chicka, don't chicka chicka, you chicka chicka will. So why chicka chicka, don't chicka chicka, you chicka chicka chill? You knew what bones to push, to twist that catheter first, and fires a fist. Oh, moment you fall, swiftly, liftly, fist breeze down, a goose Fitzbew by blissful bris. You, sir, is I, is Lamaic gorgeous tile, a Rackshaw Rickster steams the Nile, a floating babyhood's disgrace. Rabbi Rickster sprays the mace, pull the splinter and save the bone. Baby head, ingested, tested, tossed tone to dizzy blown phobe. Cinnamon sacks of lovely bop, dizzily flip the clouds on top. Scalloped falcon peregrine eye tail once upon a time. There was a moment, lovely and anxious and forever. Shh.
The audience is cheering. The stadium's going nuts.
I realized afterwards that I was really intrigued by the moment. I mean, the poem.
Oh, yeah. It is just one moment, that poem.
It's just one moment. And I think till now, I'm writing about that same moment.
Oh, well, there you have it. Well, this is the thing that so stuns me is how complete you were at the get-go. I mean, the way you play with language there, definitely the only place you hit on Spanish was when you trilled amor in this one. Other than that,
there's no real Spanish in there, but the Spanish rhythm.
Oh yeah. But you're adding the Spanish language and other languages over the years, but everything else is there. The elasticity of the word, the splitting up the word and putting another word in the middle of it. It's like you emerged fully matured as as Edwin Torres. Where's the work towards that?
No, there's a deepening that has to happen within that. But I also realized that in that poem, I was very much
deepening.
The deeper deepening. That I was very much aware of the audience. I'm writing about this stuff, and in the middle I put the chicka stuff because
that's the part that they always got the audience.
Let me
to
involve them because they're with me.
Yeah,
I feel I'm going towards a waltz. Let me just own it. Own the waltz. And that's also my Boricua kind of like I want to get you all dancing with me.
Yes.
Yes. And that's where the body comes in. So we're just shifting ahead here and there.
Oh, audience, if only you could have seen Edwin twirling in his chair here. Was that head going in a different direction? Yeah, that was, I remember it so well. That was your signature poem for a while. Then there was another poem that came in. I remember I.E. Seducer, as being, and that one you let the words dance on the page in your graphics thing. Am I right?
Yeah. That's the one where, when you and Miguel were editing Aloud, you asked me to submit stuff. And then you said, Edwin, why don't you put, I.E. Seducer on the page? I said, well, I can't do that. It's a performative piece. Mm-hmm. And you said, well, do it.
Boy, I was something back then.
You were something back then. And that it was great because it really forced me to kind of deal with, okay, what am I talking about? And how do I get it across in a medium that's not just me and that's not just on the page? Can it exist on the page? Can it exist beyond myself? Which is, I feel like I love performing on the page, performing on stage. I love performing so the audience can be taken somewhere. But I also I think that's where the deepening has happened over the years, where I realize I want somebody to take what I'm doing on their own. And yes, if they hear me and they see me, it goes somewhere else. But can they live with it without having seen this person? Can the poet exist on the words?
Words as text we're talking about here.
Yeah. Words, text, and page and everything. Right. So I was interested in. So when you gave me that prompt, I said, okay, let me see what I can do. And my graphic influence came to the fore. It's like, okay, of course, the Bauhaus guys, the Dadaist guys, they would eat this up alive and just do something with it. Okay, so should I do the whole thing? I can do part of it. I'll do. Okay, so. And this also, I.E. Seducer came from I created a mythologized art movement called interactive eclecticism, which is basically anything. I.E. Edwin. I was playing with language back. This is before poetry, quote unquote. And Dixon Place is where I did a lot of these I.E. shows, and they were basically a chance for me to just do what I can get away with. And after 3 or 4 of these shows, and I would have a packed house. It was like, what is Edwin up to now? Because I was doing these crazy things with the audience, throwing ping pong balls at them and passing tape recorders. I was really, I didn't know what not to do. So
great place to be.
Absolutely, yeah. No schooling, just like boom, life is the school. So after a year of this, I said, well, why is I.E. so interesting to me? Why is I.E. seducing me? So I.E. Seducer came from me exploring this question. And at the same time, that's about when I had the inkling of Nuyorican. So Spanish and English came into play. So this poem has all these things mixed up together. So I.E. Seducer. And this, in performance, it's preceded by about a minute of sound, vocal, phonetics, and everything. So I'll just spare you that for now. I.E. Seducer. I.E. Dusa. Me used to be young. Now, Dusa Medusa, no cosi fantong, soy comunicato. That's a bad Dusa, Mr. Rato. Speak to these cats, Mrs. Alrighto. Can you me gato, comunicato? I seduces me. I seduce Medusa me into 2 gatos there. Comunicados de comunicación de comunicar de dos to dos y los. Mythology, mythology. Dos Dios, two gods, two Zeuses, Zeus, Lusa Medusas, two sides, the in and the out, audience backstage. One speaks truth deuces through doses of truth, speaks head of that tongue. Me used to feel young juices. Me used to be you once. One. And then the two goes on to speak about the other God. So it goes on from there.
Oh, what a poem. Wow. That really takes me back to those days.
And I remember I was doing that poem for the longest time where the IE part, I would go like I, and then on the E part, I would sink my body weight down, E. And it was this very pronounced gesture. Mm-hmm. And after about 6 months of me doing that, you said, Edwin, why are you doing that? Why are you putting all that energy to that gesture? Put all that in your voice. So I said, I can do I, and stay right with the microphone. I don't need to go I, whatever. So I was learning how to like work with the energy right here, between the microphone and the voice, right, so that the audience would just hear and get the vocality of it all.
Right. Wow.
So, yeah.
I'm just thinking of those days when the cafe reopened after closing for the 80s, for
right,
AIDS crack and gentrification, say. And then the doors opened, and there you were very soon after it opened, and there Willie was, another Nuyorican voice, completely different.
Yeah.
And there was Mike Tyler,
Paul Beatty, Maggie Estep, Dale,
yes, Dale,
Tracy, like
Smith,
what a crew,
Morris, what a crew, exactly.
Yeah,
and everybody's so different. Hal Sirowitz, everybody was so different, and those differences were completely exploited is the word that came to my mind. I mean, everybody traveled their own path, and as differenter as you could be was the better it was for the totality.
Excuse me. I think that at the time, pardon me, what was really valuable, which you don't realize when you're in the beginning of an art of your communication, you don't have as many questions because you're just doing it. And all of us were so different. We were sort of like, in a way, performing for each other, not for an audience.
Mm-hmm.
Performing for other poets forces you to look at your language. like what am I writing? And it's just like worthwhile. So I think all of us brought it in different ways and were inspired by such a range of people during that time.
Yep. And it was happening at every Friday night at the Nuyorican. I mean, that was one of the things that when it reopened, I really wanted to try out, was not having poetry readings on Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoons, but going for the 9 o'clock Friday
night
slot.
was church.
Friday night. Make
open mic at midnight.
Woohoo! Open room, as Miguel would insist on calling it.
Paulie Arroyo.
Oh, my goodness. The world's worst poem.
I remember Paulie, one time, he would do these improv pieces that just went on forever, but he would throw in karate moves.
Oh yeah,
and some of them were like so brilliant because he didn't know what metaphor. I don't know if he knew technically what metaphor simile was, but he was full of that, like poetically, just like taking us somewhere beyond that room and that orality of his body, just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. Paulie Arroyo, a character from the neighborhood who used to always try to sneak past Julio at the door.
Those $5
never worked. But everybody was coming for the poetry slam. That's the thing. We haven't mentioned that these were not readings; these were slams. This was the first time that Mark Smith's poetry slam idea escaped Chicago and became a mainstay at the cafe, where there was competition going on also, and people wanted to, somebody was going to be the Grand Slam champion.
Whatever that meant.
Exactly. But Paul Beatty, who was the first, tried to throw it by doing a haiku as his last poem. Surely they can't give me a high score for this, but they did. Oh yeah. Just having the slam also was what the press bit into.
Right.
It gave a way to talk about poetry without having to talk about poetry.
And you knew that was an in, which was really vital.
I loved the slam. The minute I read about it in the New York Times, though Mark Smith's name was misspelled, I headed off to Chicago to see this thing. It had it all. It was, it bid on the athletics. It had competition. Poetry is you can't give a numerical equivalent to a poem. That is completely ridiculous, absurd, and illegal. But we did, and that's why we did it.
And those first few years, I remember you would mix the slam up by inviting people between rounds. Like Eileen Miles came up once in a slam, and she wasn't slamming. And it's like, who is this person? Whoa, what is that? And now she's off, and now we're back to the contest. Like, what was that? What was that? So you knew to keep the show going in that way, and injecting culture with culture.
Oh yeah, and then we had the National Slam teams going out to try to win the championship.
Did Mike Tyler ever possibly try to do a slam? I don't see him as like a.
I can't remember. I do remember him when he was reading a poem on the back of a truck and jumped off and broke his arm.
Yeah,
broke his arm.
And he wrote a poem about that.
That I remember. Well, but people, at the Nuyorican, people graduated from the slam. And you were one of the people that did that. It's sort of, you were named. Weren't you the first fresh poet?
I was the first. It was me against Willie and Paul. I don't know if they. Who else is there? I don't know. Let's just choose them. And I joke about it. It was great to kind of have that energy thrown around it.
I think it was because you were the weirdest.
I was the weirdest, yeah.
So therefore, you were the freshest.
I barely. I don't know if I even won. I won my first slam, and I came second many times because I was just too weird. I would use a slam as a chance to do. I did it to do performance poems. Right. There was a poem I did called "Orgy Loves Quickie," which is about Bullwinkle and Rocky having a menage a trois with Ricky and Lucy. And I did that poem as a huge printout. I had two people from the audience hold it. It was my round. And, we have 3 minutes to do this in. So, because if you go past 3 minutes, you get points deducted. It's kind of crazy. Boy. So I had two people hold up this like large printout of the poem. The poem was designed to be like an umbrella. And as I read this poem about an orgy, I wore red lipstick. I had my hair tied off in a bun. I was wearing like black fishnet. I was totally like, what pronoun is he? Who knows? Just like watch the poem. So I'm reading it into the microphone. As I'm reading it, I'm crossing out the letters with lipstick. And when I'm done, I put lipstick on the two people holding up the thing. And I think I got a low score. I don't know what score I got, but I didn't care. It was a way to play with everything,
Yeah, using the slam as a stage for a variety of poetries was the idea at the Nuyorican, and that's what happened.
Yeah. Dale did these incredible monologues as poems.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. But so
Saul Williams.
Yeah. But I think you're going towards what poem I wrote after. Yes. So towards that end, the group of poets that you assembled to have us travel around the country, the Nuyorican Poets Live.
Right.
One of those trips was to Alaska. And it was during those trips that I wrote a lot of pieces, and I realized, okay, there's more to slam. There's more to what I'm doing beyond slam. So I assume you're going to ask me about Edwin, what poem did you write?
Yeah, what would be a poem that would show this new move for Edwin Torres beyond slam?
Yes.
Okay, how's that?
So this poem is called Below Horizon. Eagles mate for life. They sit as one shape against the freezing sunset. I'm far from where they sit, but not from what they see. To my eyes on this beach of rock sits the image of lifelong commitment. Against enveloping peaks and valleys of snow-encrusted mountains, blue against the setting red of a freezing sun which paints this pair with the moment it takes for them to see me. I'm left alone to wonder about lifelong mates freezing at home. Does sundown freezing go home to lifelong mate alone below horizon? Is her home where mine is below horizon where I, solitude against frigid wind, whipping frenzy inside stirred confusion, have no rocks to sit on, no blisters to scale instead. Too many words. They take up too much seeing. And this pair, in silent conversation, with eyes perceiving subtle shifts in grasp for prey, with eyes that see beyond mountains and freezing, with razors sharp and distant rise, with eyes that hunt for slightest movement, which gaze into each other for slightest change, then gaze out over frigid ocean, beyond mountain solace, in each other's moment, then gone. And I, left alone to remember them on this beach, am frozen with the time it takes to wonder if my lifelong mate waits for me with eyes this hungry back at home.
Wow. So the exterior landscape
The landscape, the moment,
moves in by
the
still
idea
the same
of
moment.
still the moment,
Yeah.
the body.
But how about that love poem twist?
Yeah.
You
At
know,
the end,
that's something new coming in there.
right. A little bit of heart in there. Yeah.
Um,
Because I saw that. Then I was also discovering the poetry project. You know, and then there was a new interest in like, okay, the page, like what's you know,
Right.
where are all these other poems? Because of course I'm reading poems, but to see the poems performed by non-performers, quote unquote,
Right.
which also then I would see Creeley at the poetry project, and that's as much performance. I realized, okay, performance is not what I think performance can be, because he's as much in just the being of the words, the being of the text. You embody it, and that's what I got a lot from the poetry project.
Right. Robert Creeley, fantastic poet. He's his voice carried this tremble of life that was always bringing you to truth.
Mhm.
And he wrote very short lined
A lot of
poems,
air around, space around them, yeah.
and he'd put a lot of air around the words as he spoke them. It was a completely different approach to poetry than what was going on at the cafe, but it was also, you know, as true as can be to it, and it gave another direction, and here another direction to you for doing that.
I think the space that I got from Creeley was really vital in understanding where the body can exist in language for me, where you know the physicality of the being can emerge in different ways, you know, in syntax, in syllable, in rhyme and sound, of course, but also just like in like a sort of honor and restraint around the message. You don't have to tell me everything. let me think.
Don't tell me everything.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact,
Right.
don't tell me.
Because then I'm done. Where do I go with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that certainly informs your anthology here, The Body in Language. I know we're skipping decades at this point. We'll go back,
Yeah.
but it just seems like a time for the Body in Language, an anthology edited by Edwin Torres that is published by Counterpath. Certainly stirred up the downtown scene here with the variety of poets that you included in here. Can you give us a brief description of what this book is?
After years of wondering, like, what is it about? Same like IE Seducer. Why does IE seduce me so much? Why does the body seduce me so much? So I figured, let me just, if I can't necessarily write about it, let me collect people that are inspiring me. And I realized that I was interested in stepping outside of just poetry. The anthology embodies healing practitioners, musicians, not just writers. Although they would not call themselves writers. I think we would, you know, in a way. I feel like, you know, people write their lives with every step. You know, it's that kind of thing. So like we're all writers. It's a matter of like catching it. So I would some of them I had to pull to kind of like, no, it's worth writing about, really. And so, you know, I think same as you prompting me to do the design for IE Seducer. I think editors can envision things that other people maybe don't, so they pull for that thread. So same thing with this. And I really wanted to have a collection of I didn't want like a, what is it, a dictum? I didn't want like a final word on what the body is in language. The title was really hard to come up with. I had all these clever poetic titles, and the publisher said, "Well, isn't this about the body and language?" I said, "Yeah, oh, it should be." So just that simplicity. It's like, oh, of course, that's what I'm writing about, the body and language. So so the gathering was one thing, the assembling and the sequencing. Oh, what I think interesting, I wanted to have chapters of bodies. So the chapters are groups of 4 people, 4 contributors, and I assigned each contribution to an element.
Yeah, this is just amazing. There's 16 Roman numeraled chapters here,
Right.
and each one has 4 poets. that have one of the elements assigned to them.
Right.
The elements aren't in any specific order either.
In effect, everybody's work goes with each element. For my purposes, I wanted for me the overriding theme of that particular contribution, was more water, more air, more thinking, more this or that. But in effect, we all encompass each other, and I wanted the anthology to sort of capture that. So it's also in book form. How do you kind of build traffic?
Right.
Get you to go back and forth. So it's not just one sequential kind of thing.
It's a dialogue or a conversation or a colloquy, or
to make it organic, so that I can choose to pick that up and that up and that up, and then that's one body and so forth.
It moves it all the way through.
Yeah.
And so, do you have something about this language
to read about that?
To read about that?
In a way. Notice how I'm far away. Notice how I just heard I'm far away. Oh,
Edwin,
there he is.
Come back, Edwin. Come back.
Oh, wait. Oh, he's performing again. Oh, no.
Edwin is twirling. He's
Oh,
now got
there
his
he
fingers
is.
down on the ground
And
as
I'm
he
being
lifts
talked
his feet
about.
and
I don't
moves
want to be
over
talked
a
about,
little
but I
bit
am
to
being
get
talked
back
about
to
because
the
I can't
microphone.
help it.
It's
I just look
unbelievable
out
as
the
he
window
steps
and I see a
aside. This is
poem.
his book.
Okay. So I have a poem from my recent book. Did you want me to read something from the anthology?
Read the recent book poem.
One of those things called book poems. Yeah, those are very popular these days. Yeah.
No, they're not. They've moved on to the
yes,
TikTok poem.
The TikTok poem. What the hell? Yeah. Okay. So that's a whole nother. Yeah. That's okay. We talked about the new collection of poetry and how the new readership of poetry are collectors.
Okay. Like you're talking about NFTs.
NFS is better.
Yeah,
NFTs and poetry. We talk about that. Anyway,
not for sale.
We divulge. We diverge.
Yes.
And in our divergence, we divulge. Must be the Bowery talking.
Now his glasses are beginning to.
Oh, right. So this poem, Bob and I talked about. Bob will be commenting as I read this. Is that correct?
I guess. I mean, we did that for the last one, but let's do it.
That was the thing. Oh, that was the performance. We're done. Oh,
okay. Well, in that case,
no. Let me. So now I'll read a poem.
Okay, I'll see what happens here.
Oh, remember Torvaci?
Oh, yeah, our duet.
Our duet. That's right. This is like, okay, so audience, Bob and I, this is when, 20 years ago? This is before Rubio, before my child of 16. And it came, I don't know why we came up with it. I think we saw that we had a certain natural repartee.
We had to repartee.
And it's gone. No. So
has the partay.
But where I dressed up as I was doing Steve Cannon's play, and I had a character, and you said, we should do that character. Whatever. So I dressed up in this thing, and were you dressed up too or no?
I was dressed up too, yes.
But I didn't, I said nonsense, and you interpreted it for me.
Exactly.
And that's what it was, yeah. And I think it was my inspiration of like the nomads of life, the various, estuaries that we run into in life and how they appear as like people. And Bob would pick up on like, oh, what are you,
what are you water? Hang on tight.
Audience, this is brilliant. What are your water? That should be the title of this podcast.
What are your water?
Yeah.
You can't step into the same river once.
Unless you douse your toe. Okay, so
here we go.
Here we go. So this is actually a written poem in the newest book called Quanundrum, I Will Be Your Many-Angled Thing from Roof Books. This came out in 2021. The Acrobat's Last Meal. Once you are given the opening to encounter negative space in proportion to positive space, a new balance is born, a calm out of kinetic obstruction. Your gift to become the obstruction.
Words themselves
to resonate in the steady.
To become noun things in your mind.
When proportion is introduced to combustion,
with language,
the fracture ignites so that change is born out of proportion. The process of proportion and sizing it out is the investment that time brings to you, to the work. You are the work you interfere with.
In this point is you.
The inherited cycle past the moment of its creation. You are designed interference beyond the continuum you design.
Is you.
The moment
You,
continuously
in this
at
continuous
moment
moment
with
that we've
itself,
discussed before, continues on. And
forced
you are the
into your
other
livingness by your
50%.
exact
Your
not
creativity
steadiness.
is called upon
Molecular insurgents arriving
to get your molecules in order.
among the ravenous stability who
ready
threaten
to
change
stand under
with immobility.
rather than understand.
If
There's an if
I don't move,
and if not.
is my move.
There's the moving. He's doing it. He's standing on his toes like a ballerina.
No one
and
moves.
looking gorgeous in the spotlight.
Where does proportion allow breath? There is removal among the language seekers, among the colloquial inventing recipes for stagnant breath, at war with their mobile brethren.
Never has the voice appeared except when it is breathing.
I am
The
gored
teeth are there.
by the headline,
The tusks are there.
masquerading as finished.
It's not over.
A deification of balance by demons of instability.
The acrobats are back. The circus is happening.
Approaching consumption without a flinch.
There's no eating without a fork.
The self-carnivore is the master of swallowing. Okay. And Bob, will you describe the page that it's next? It's next to.
Yeah, it's next to a page that has every word typed
Bob
on
is
top
getting
of every
scared
other
of
word.
explaining my
Breath, it's
my
constant.
page. He's not
There's
sure
no
what
page
he's
there.
talking
I
about.
am totally a self-carnivore
He
these
sees
days when I'm
the,
swallowing.
graphics,
I'm seeing under the
thinking it's a poem,
undertones.
and yet the poet is turning the page.
Oh my goodness, the poem goes on, and it goes on backwards. That's the most amazing part.
The
of it.
interesting
No, it's
thing
not.
is
There's a
Bob's
thread that runs from the instability
inner
to a fascination.
conundrum
It's
of
designing the proportion
fascination,
among language
and yet
seekers.
he is looking
It's among the
for a
colloquial.
river of
There's no
white in the
river.
middle of the page.
There
However,
is
the
a
poet will
dark
now
spot
close
here.
the
It
book.
must be a word.
And then the poem is finished.
Swallow. Could you open your Bible?
Turn to page
No.
Guagua.
I would like to. Miguel and I used to do this. I would love it. Do you have a loud down there?
I do.
Why don't you turn to page 312? Here is a.
Audience, if you have the book with you, please turn to page 312.
This is a poem by Lucky Cienfuegos.
This is the sound of the audience turning.
Oh,
Okay.
beautiful. Lucky Cienfuegos was one of the originators of the Nuyorican, who disappeared. I mean, no one knows what happened to Lucky. Supposedly it was something having to do with cannabis, but those were before.
I guess you can disappear from cannabis.
It certainly happened to him. This is a poem of his called "In the Pocket and Spend It Right." People.
Am I reading this with you?
Yeah, it's a duet, by the way.
Oh.
I forgot to tell you that.
Okay.
Miguel and I did it. Now you can do it.
Okay.
Here we go. In the pocket.
In the pocket
And
spend it right. People.
Chinese philosophers.
Philosophers of mystical magic.
Talk of tossing pennies away.
Talk of tossing
For
pennies away.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Talking
of throwing coins
in dark corners.
Dark corners.
Chinese philosophers.
Why? Well, let's bring about some magic.
Glow.
So maybe we can glow.
We'll bring on
Let's
some
glow.
glow.
To glow.
Pennies are thrown.
What are you going to throw? You're going to throw pennies? Pennies throw. Good luck.
Believe
that. Not my friend. Yo, you're my friend.
Put it in your pocket.
And spend it right.
I'm Bob Holman, and thank you for listening to Poetry is Bread. Subscribe to our podcast to get notifications of new episodes, or check us out at bowerypoetry.com. The podcast is co-produced by Ram Devanini and Flavia Roja with Rataplax. The podcast series is funded by the Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State with fundings provided by the U.S. government and implemented by Global Ties U.S. in partnership with the Office of Alumni Affairs and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Additional support from New York State Council on the Arts, Governor of New York State Kathy Hochul, and the New York State Legislature.